Good morning, everybody. My name is Charles RIOTTO, as you just heard, and I would like to start out by thanking Hosnell and his team at MDEC first of all, for inviting me and for your very warm hospitality for the time I've been here. It's been just a wonderful experience, and also congratulations on a great conference. I've had a chance to speak to some of the participants over the last few days, and I think everybody's really learned a lot by being here. So as LIMA, we certainly look forward to continuing to work with MDEC in the future and to help build and develop the licensing industry here in Malaysia. Let me tell you a little bit about LIMA. Adam gave a nice introduction, but we are the primary trade association for the licensing industry around the world. We're the main source of information, education, and networking opportunities. 1,100 members and counting in 32 countries around the world. And we're headquartered in the United States in New York, but we also have offices in China, Hong Kong, Tokyo, Melbourne, London, Munich, Mexico City, and now we just recently opened one in Toronto. Let's move up. Please, when you get a chance, visit our website, licensing.org. You'll find a lot of really great information there. Most of it is free to anybody who visits. Some of it is in a password-protected area for LIMA members, but I think you'll be able to learn a lot just by kind of making your way around the website. Now, there's a lot of definitions of licensing. This one up on the screen is one that our attorney uses, and as you can see, it's kind of got that legal aspect to it that attorneys love to use. But there's a number of other different definitions, and they all kind of say the same thing. I have a kind of a different take on licensing. I like to say that it's a process that can help you make your property or brand bigger, more famous, and more profitable. And as we get into the presentation, we'll talk a little bit more about that, and I'm sure you heard a lot of the comments in the sessions yesterday that also gave you ideas on how that might be able to work. Licensing now is one of the most important contemporary forms of marketing and brand extension. If we were having this conversation 10 years ago, I don't think we would be able to say that. A lot of people considered licensing as kind of, a side business and something that, maybe might help to generate a few extra dollars or things like that. But over the last several years, licensing has really come to the forefront as a marketing tool. Almost every Fortune 500 company has some kind of a licensing program in place. In addition to, of course, almost every entertainment company that has a licensable brand, sports leagues, fashion designers, just about all kinds of companies really are seeing licensing as an important part of their business. And in many companies, licensing now has a seat at the table along with all the other marketing disciplines as an important component in building a company's presence and structure. Now, if you own a brand, why would you license it? What are the advantages of it? First of all, it could help you increase the awareness of your brand because you have exposure now to so many more different points of contacts than you normally would with just your regular distribution channels. Of course, there's the opportunity to make a profit with licensing. Not all companies license just for a profit. A lot of corporate brands do it because it helps increase their brand equity and the value of their brand. But a lot of companies certainly do depend on the revenues that come from a licensing program. It can help you keep your brand fresh, especially if it's an older brand or an older entertainment property. Licensing keeps it in front of your consumers. It gives you an opportunity to kind of tweak it and adjust it and make it more contemporary for today's audiences. Very important, strengthens the brand relevance to consumers. Today, it's really important to reach your consumers in as many ways as possible. For an entertainment brand, it used to be just the movie itself or the TV program. Now there's so many other ways for you to reach your consumers, and I'll talk about that a little bit more, but licensing certainly helps you do that. And also helps protect against infringement with the usages of your brand in several different formats. For a licensee, if you're a manufacturer, again, how can licensing help you? first of all, creates an instant credibility. If you acquire the license of a very famous brand or property, that reflects very strongly and positively on your company. It provides a shortcut to the marketplace. Instead of having to develop your own brand, you can leverage that license that you have in order to get into retail in a much quicker way. Instant recognition with retailers. Of course, they're always looking for the next big hot thing, and if you happen to have that license, that's going to help you get in the door. And also gain new retail distribution. Again, instead of facing competition of everybody else who has a similar brand, you now have that particular license that everybody wants, and that helps you get into more retail doors than you may normally have been able to do. Let's take a look at the size of the industry. Lima recently conducted our first global size of the licensing industry study last year for 2014. Previously, we'd done a size of the US market. We expanded that to the global market last year. We're doing it again this year, and the results for 2015 will be announced very shortly. But for now, the most recent numbers I have for 2014, and that shows the size of the licensing industry on a global basis at $241 billion, US dollars. So as you can see, it's a massive industry. Licensing is bigger than many standalone industries on its own. So there's a lot of money to be made. The industry is growing on a global basis. It'll be interesting to see what the numbers for 2015 come back to say, but I'm certain it's going to show significant growth across the board. And if you translate that $241 billion in retail sales, it comes out to about almost $13.5 billion in royalties paid. So these are royalties received by property owners from licensees for the use of their logos, trademarks, images, whatever. So again, a very, very large, massive business around the world. This gives you an idea of the of retail sales across the global market. Now, again, if we were having this conversation 10 years ago, that big blue area would have been a lot bigger, because licensing 10 or 15 years ago was very much a US-based business. And it still is, but the growth in the world market has been very significant. So you can see all these different regions that have sprung up in licensing that previously had only very, very minor activity. So we're starting to see growth on a global basis. Let's take a look at the 6 major licensing markets according to our research data. As you can see, the US is still by far the major market. But again, years ago, the US probably made up about 90 or 92% of global licensing revenues. Now it accounts for about 56%. And that doesn't mean that the US market is shrinking, because it's not. It's still growing. But what it does mean is the rest of the global market is growing. And if you look down to the bottom at China and Hong Kong, this is at the present time the fastest growing market. So we will continue to see that rise up the list. And I don't know if any of you have attended the Hong Kong licensing show, but I've moderated the Keynote panel there for several years now. And I said about 4 years ago that I expect by the year 2020, China and Hong Kong will be the second largest licensing market, and I still believe that. So I think there's great growth to come from that market, and also throughout the rest of Asia, which I'll get to in a minute. This slide now, according to our data, shows the largest Southeast Asia licensing markets. So as you can see, India has a pretty big lead at over $1 billion. Followed by Singapore, Vietnam, Malaysia, and Thailand. And again, those numbers, I'm certain, will increase as we come out with our survey for the more recent year. But certainly, we're seeing some significant business development in these Southeast Asian countries. I thought it might be interesting to look at the numbers on a per capita basis. India was up at the top of the list as far as retail sales, but they have a massive population. So if you take this down by per capita sales, you can see that India, because of its over 1 billion population, the numbers come out to kind of a much smaller number on a per capita basis, whereas Singapore, with a relatively small population, has a very high per capita sales percentage. Interesting, Malaysia has a pretty healthy per capita licensed product sales of over $14. So that shows that in this country, people are very aware of licensed merchandise, and they recognize the value, and I believe we'll see that continue to grow. So I think that gives great optimism for people who are trying to grow their licensing business here in the Malaysian market. This takes a look at licensing by licensing segment. Now, most of you, I think, probably look at licensing as being mostly an entertainment type business, which is still the major segment of the industry. But it's important to note that there's lots of other segments of licensing that are quite healthy businesses. Corporate brand licensing is the second largest segment. This is mainly for the time being a US and Western Europe business. I don't see too much corporate brand licensing going on in other parts of the world, but I do certainly think there's a great opportunity there. A lot of people really favor the corporate brand segment because it's stable. Usually brands are there for the long term. It doesn't go up and down quite as much as some of the other segments. So if you're in the licensing business, if you're planning to develop a brand or an agency, you might want to look beyond just the entertainment segment as a possible source of growing your business. This one takes a look at retail sales of licensed merchandise in these markets by licensing segment. And again, as you can see, the entertainment segment is still very much the dominant segment in each one of the Southeast Asian markets. Malaysia is, I think, maybe a little more diverse than most of the other ones because it does have a corporate brand size of over 12%. So that's very encouraging to see that the business here is starting to look at other segments besides just the entertainment. And again, nothing wrong with the entertainment segment. It's certainly a very viable business and will continue to grow. That bottom line kind of gives you a gauge on how these markets are doing compared to the global averages. So as you can see on a global basis, it's a little more evenly spread out. And I think that's the way these markets will go as the business continues to mature. One more chart. This looks at the industry by product category. And again, years ago, those big areas on the right-hand side, I think would have been even bigger, apparel, toys, accessories. But as the industry has continued to grow and mature, we're seeing a lot more movement into other product categories. So this, again, is not just the toy and apparel business. It cuts into gifts, paper, music, publishing, sports, health and beauty. So there's a lot of opportunities to extend your brand through licensing in lots of different product categories. This slide looks at Malaysian retail sales by most popular product categories. And as you can see, as in most areas outside the US and Western Europe, the toys are one of the biggest categories. What I thought was interesting, according to our data, apparel was only the third largest category, where in most markets it's either first or second. So that might indicate there's still some room for growth in the apparel licensing category here in Malaysia. On the other hand, I think we're seeing pretty consistent percentages with the rest of the global averages. This gives you an idea of royalty rates. So one of the questions I get asked all the time is, what are average royalty rates? What can people expect to get from licensors, or what can licensors expect to get for their properties? Now, the average column is the average, but there is a range. So it ranges from, for the apparel category, between 7 and 16% for about 90% of the properties. Of course, the most popular properties command the highest royalty rate, and the ones that are kind of newer, trying to break in, are on the lower end of that scale. But I just thought this might help you understand where average global royalty rates are for different product categories in the licensing business. Since 2014 was the first year of our study, I don't have a history going back to show you whether the industry has gone up or down. I will in a couple months when the new survey comes out. But what we did in the survey is we asked participants to tell us how they saw 2015 unfolding compared to 2014, or whether they thought their licensing business would go up, go down, or stay about the same. And the responses we got from Southeast Asia was that respondents expected a growth of 10.5% in their licensing business from 2014 to 2015. So we'll find out if that's true when the 2015 numbers are available. But I think that does show there's a great deal of optimism for the licensing business in Southeast Asia. 10.5% is a very impressive growth rate. So I think people are really understanding that this is an industry that's got great growth opportunities. As I know you've heard in some of the other presentations yesterday, if you were here, in order to have a successful licensing program, you can't just depend on a single format. If you're a movie, you can't really just depend on the movie generating awareness for your licensing business, or a TV program, or really anything. You really have to reach your consumers at basically every touch point that you possibly can. Through mobile devices, apps, social media, basically all the new technologies that consumers are using now. You really should be taking advantage of all these to really keep in touch with your consumer base, because you can be sure your competitors are doing it and you don't want to be left behind. So you really need to think in a much broader sense for building a licensing program than in previous years. Another very important aspect to building a licensing business is online retailing, which will continue to grow. I believe one of the speakers touched on this yesterday. One of the major research institutions said that by 2018, online shopping will account for 11% of total sales. And that's really amazing when you think not too long ago, not many people were actually going online and buying that way. But we have a younger generation who's used to this technology now. We have even older people who feel more comfortable with going online, that it's more secure. And also, it's a great opportunity for people who may not have access to retail stores on a regular basis, such as those who are in cities where retail is maybe not as available as it is in some of the major cities. So they've turned to online shopping. So again, if you're selling licensed products, you really need to explore all the opportunities available to you in online licensing. And as you can see by that last paragraph, the online licensing or online retailing in Malaysia is really expected to grow at a very healthy rate. So this market has really embraced it, and it's another great opportunity for sales of your merchandise. A couple of trends, I'll try to finish up pretty quickly. Partnerships, again, very important in the licensing industry. It's much easier to reach your consumers if you have a partner in the industry that also brings something to the table. So we're seeing a lot more, especially entertainment companies, partnering with celebrities, personalities, anybody who's really current and popular with their consumer base. So you should think about reaching out to others who can help your business grow and who there could be some mutual benefits for building your licensing program. Global expansion, I mentioned Hollywood studios, but it's not just Hollywood studios, it's really every kind of business now really needs to look to the global market for their growth. The US market, Western Europe are still great markets, but they're kind of mature. we haven't seen dramatic growth there, but we have in other parts of the world, particularly China, as I mentioned before. So really look beyond your local area to build your business. One of the trends, video games to movies. There really haven't been too many great critical and commercial successes in video games, or properties that started as video games and went into movies. But I do think that is a trend that we'll start to see more and more of. Assassin's Creed is coming out later this year, and so far that's gotten very favorable publicity as far as being a movie that will be critically successful. And I'm sure that will spur other additional movements into that area. So, if you're into the video game or the app business, I think there's probably more opportunities for you now to expand your property into movies or other formats than there may have been before. Continued success of adult TV license. Not quite sure if there's too many properties here in this region that have been successful, but I imagine you're probably familiar with at least Game of Thrones, maybe not Downton Abbey, but Game of Thrones has had a really excellent licensing program, and one of the new wave of adult-themed TV programs that have been very successful in licensing. We haven't seen too many of them in the past, but as more and more programming of this type is developed, I think that'll open up a lot more opportunities for TV program licensing beyond the typical children's programming. Consumer electronics, another very interesting category that I think has great opportunities in licensing. Now there's so much popularity with action heroes, superheroes, fantasy, all those types of properties that really lend themselves to all the new technology in consumer electronics. So again, another category for you to think about, especially if you have a property that's kind of embraces the action figure and the fantasy element. Consumer electronics is a great area to consider for expanding your business. Finally, another area where I think there's great opportunities is in health and beauty and home improvement products. As economies get better, people have a little more disposable income. We find that they're more willing to spend money, first of all, on themselves and on their homes. And usually when they do that, they want to buy brand names that they know and trust and can be proud of. In many cases, that's licensed product. So again, I think another area to consider for a product category that you may want to go into that you may not have had a top of mind previously to that. So I'd like to leave you with a brief video about what Lima does and the types of things that we're expanding into.
One of the great things about Lima, it actually connects people and develops relationships and develops business on a global basis.
It's not just about the US anymore. It's a lot more international.
I've just noticed an enormous shift of Lima becoming more relevant in many markets around the world. In the UK, in Germany, in Spain, in Japan, Hong Kong, and now of course in Australia. And I just think it's just a fantastic tool to tie the industry together.
I do believe that the international markets are a lot more active than ever and growing, not just with local properties, but trying something different. They're trying different platforms, different content, different ways of doing business.
Intellectual property is the business of the 21st century. The world is the place where you do that business, and that's what Lima is doing to support it.
That last speaker was Kelvin Gardner, who runs our UK office, and as he said, licensing and IP is the business of the 21st century, and I really believe that's true. I really think this is where great opportunities lie ahead, and for people who understand how to leverage their intellectual property, I think you're really in a good spot at this point in time. So in closing, I'll just leave you with this final slide. It's really important, I think, for you to get out and see what's going on in licensing around the world. To meet people, you get a good idea what the trends are, what the new areas of activity are. So these are the three major licensing shows coming up in the months ahead. Licensing Expo in Las Vegas coming up in 2 weeks. I know it's kind of a long trip for you, but if you're able to go, it's really a fantastic show. It's massive, and you'll see just about everything that's going on in the industry currently and what's going to be happening in the years ahead. Brand Licensing Europe is the major show after Las Vegas. Started out as pretty much a European show, but it's becoming more and more of a global event as well. And something a little closer to home, China Licensing Expo in October in Shanghai. So again, if you're able to attend, I would really encourage you to do so. I think you'll find it very worthwhile. So with that, I would like to thank you for your attention, and I wish all of you much success in licensing going forward. Thank you so much.
Big round of applause, please, for Charles. Thank you very much, sir, for that.